Welcome back. Welcome back. Like I always say, the idea shift. This is the Blue Room podcast. We're chopping it up about masculinity because that topic is just on my heart. I bless the mic because I got something to say. I rock headphones because I'm listening twice as much as I talk. And I just met this man happenstance in the gym and
Yes.
been talking for months. And this is one
Yes.
of the most dynamic people I have met. I don't talk to everybody in the gym, obviously. I do view him as a man. I do view him as masculine, and I view him as that way because of why he carries himself. So I'm going to let him introduce himself to you. And if he leaves some stuff out that I know, I'm going to make sure I mention it. But we're about to chop up the topic, what is masculinity? Because we'll bring some females on the show. Maybe the next show, we'll bring some women in the studio to chop it up with both of us. But right now, I have the illustrious Dr. McNair on the show. What's up, Doc? Tell them who you are, what you got going on, and
Oh,
anything you want to reveal about yourself that's important for people to know.
Mr. Harris, man, I appreciate you bringing me on the show. I'm Dr. McNair. I've been an educator, a school administrator for probably a quarter of a century now, 20, 25 years. I
Okay.
write a great deal in different op-eds and journals and things of that nature. And I oftentimes write about politics and economics and education. And as you stated, we met just by chance in the weight room, and we've been chopping it up and talking about a whole lot of things.
Right, right.
And it's been great.
Yeah.
It's been great, man. And I'm gonna tell you, this topic is wonderful. It's a great topic. I like I like the topic. It's a complex one, though, Mr. Harris.
Okay.
It's complex, as you well know. We are in a phase in our society that is almost gender neutral,
Yes,
and
yes.
so it's a very difficult conversation to have because we got to be politically correct. We don't want to offend people, so it's difficult. But your conversations are not they are encompassing many things, but they are not excluding anyone. And I like how you
Correct.
preface it by saying you don't want to offend, and I want to echo that. It's not about offending people. It's about sometimes saying some things that may make us a little uncomfortable, and then looking at some of the data. It's the data
Yes.
that has to lead
Yes.
our discussion.
That's right.
64% of all head of the households are headed up by women in the black community. That's a problem. But in the
Yes.
white
Yes.
community, you're talking 20 some percent. How did we get here? How was it that almost two-thirds of all African American children are are living in a home where there's only a single mom? How did we get here? And what can we do to improve those numbers? So
Yes.
that's why
And
I'm having this conversation.
we're gonna have a conversation. We got a whole segment, which ain't a lot of time,
Yes.
especially with me and you talking.
Yeah.
So for the people who are listening, what is masculinity? Me and you, we what is masculinity, Dr. McNair? I mean, because you're an educator and you've been doing it for a long time. You've dealt with men, you've
Mm.
dealt with boys, teenagers, whatever. What is masculinity?
Very good. Let's give the definition. It is defined as a possession of rituals or features associated with men, which can mean the roles, the behaviors, and the attributes. And you talked about the attributes. Now that is the definition that we have. However, there's some cultural aspects of it as well. So in other words, how people in certain communities may define masculinity may be different in another community. What we just gave is a generic definition of it. Again, it is defined as a possession of attributes or features associated with men, which can include their roles, their behaviors, and their attributes. However, how does it play out in certain communities? How
Right.
does it play out culturally? That's where we get this division and where we get some differences of how we see it. Some would argue that is a social construct. Certainly, a man and a woman is not a social construct. That's biological. But how we define this is where we get this social aspect, and quite frankly, where it can get a little toxic, so to speak. I'll leave it at that. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, and to piggyback off you, like we was just saying, normal conversation. The
Yes.
fundamental issue with the social construct thing, yes, it is socially constructed, but it's socially necessarily constructed that way. Like there are just traits that are associated to men that the society needs, and they
Mhm.
traditionally come from men.
Mhm.
So when it's kind of like at home when I would fall down and cut myself, I
Mhm.
go, "Oh, mommy, help me prepare, help me put peroxide in my sore." But
Mhm.
when I felt like somebody was breaking into my house, I didn't call my mama.
Mhm.
I called my daddy
Mhm.
because I associate my daddy with a different type of safety than I associate my mother with. My
Mhm.
father can establish that boundary. My father was trained in the martial arts. Now, he wasn't always there. I don't want to get into that. But
Right.
I didn't call my mom to keep me safe. I called
Mhm.
my mom when I needed nurturing, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
every boy needs to be affirmed by a man to know he's a man. He needs
Mhm.
to be brought in into a company of men, not a company of women. So I pledged Phi Beta Sigma fraternity. That's where the blue room came from. It was a room of initiation. And I need men to tell me I'm men, to tell me I'm a man. A woman telling me that I'm a man doesn't really mean anything to me because men have to tell men when they're men. Do you understand what I'm saying? And I
I
think
understand.
that people may not perceive it that way, but there's a strength in a man
Mhm.
that society needs. And I
Mhm.
think we've confused toxic masculinity with bad men.
Mhm.
And those two are not synonymous.
So you're saying that a woman can raise a man.
Yes, she can raise a man to a
Yes,
certain extent. She can raise a man. She
yes,
can raise a man.
yes, you can. And I want to be clear about that because there've been a lot of women who've raised some wonderful men. And so again, I want to, I want to, again, I'm going to reiterate that sometimes. I want to be clear. You have households that may have two men or households that may have two women. This discussion you're having is about households. You're talking about the need to make sure that we do something about the data that shows we have households where they're being ran almost exclusively by women, and we need that balance. And so I want to be mindful of that because that's where we are in our society.
Well, I
And
have a good question. I have a good question for you.
yes,
Spice it up some.
yes.
What does a household miss when the man is not there, even if the woman does it right? Because
Mm,
I think we confuse them. We confuse things with them being doing, with things being done right,
mm-hmm,
with things being done the way it's supposed to be.
mm-hmm,
Okay, so there may be some things that a boy can miss, even if his mother raises him right.
indeed.
Okay, so what happens to a young man who's raised by his mama?
Mm-hmm,
He's successful and all that, but what may be some things that he is still missing, even
mm-hmm.
though his mother raised him the best that she could?
And that's a great question. And it depends on that particular household. But I think most people will agree that there would be some deficits. And that's why those women oftentimes they seek out role models. They go into that extended family. They look at those, we talk about it takes a village. And so they realize that sometimes there's some things that they don't know. They may, how does a young man learn how to shave? How do you explain to the young man about the birds and the beads and make him feel comfortable in that space? You being of the opposite sex. Um, how does a young man deal with bullying? How does a young man deal with his emotions?
Yeah,
And
that's
I
good.
think that that male provides some answers that maybe that female may not be able to provide. And I think some women would agree with that. That's why they seek out those others that who can provide positive role models. Being an educator for many years, I've seen that. Your parents have said, Dr. McNair, do you have any? Do you have any mentoring? What do you all have? Because my son may need X, Y, Z. The fraternities, as you talked about, they've been able to provide that kind of help to families, and particularly single moms. And so, but I do understand that there is a deficit, and I think most people will indeed agree with that aspect. But there's some things that are lacking. There are some things that are lacking,
Yeah,
and we can look at some of the data. We can talk about the overrepresentation of young men in our penal institutions. We can talk about the fact that homicide is the leading cause of death for Black males who are 20 and under. What is that?
hmm.
How did we get here? There's some deficits that
Man.
give rise to some of those statistics. And I know we can talk about the societal influences, but what can we do to mitigate some of those influences. And that's the challenge that you're presenting, Mr. Harris, in this wonderful space. What can we do to overcome some of those barriers and get things, quote unquote, on the right track, so to speak, or make things better?
And I want to hit this again with the women. The reason why I want to hit this again with the women, I'm not trying to offend women, but I
Yes.
think sometimes it's something I always say that better is the enemy of good. Okay. So because we have some women who have been successfully doing it good, that woman may not think that if a man was there, it could have been done better. And I disagree with that. I
Mm,
believe that the order of things, the statistics show,
mm,
like you said, the statistics show that when a man is there, all of the social ills in society will be reduced. Okay. Now, even if a woman does a good job,
mm.
we still need to strive for the better.
We do.
And when we do the better, we need to strive for the more excellent, because what's
Mm,
starting to happen now is baby mama is like common jargon now. Like
mm.
baby mama. And actually, the expectation now is that the father is not in the home.
Absolutely.
In the black family, 70, almost 70%, it's like 68, 5, almost 70% of these men are not in their households.
Right.
And my question is, it's not just the house they're not in, they're not in the community. This same man pulled out the community could have been somebody else's mentor.
Hmm.
This
Hmm.
man could have been another boy's mentor. He
Hmm.
could have been another boy's uncle, another boy's coach. So the ramifications, it's masculinity. And I think females now in today's society and men underestimate what men and masculinity bring to the table.
Yeah.
I think it's underestimated. I think because a guy gets a degree and
Right.
he starts a successful business. Well,
Mhm.
what other things may he lack? How does he treat his wife? How
Indeed.
does he treat women?
Indeed.
How does he transmit what he's learned as a man to the next generation when he wasn't taught how to be one? Because you're an educator,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
How much is learned from modeling versus you being verbally taught by somebody? How much do I learn from being a man by watching my father be a man?
Yes.
What do I learn from him by watching him talk to my mother? What do I learn by watching him go to work every day, watching him navigate the house, watching him fix on cars, watching him talk to other men in the community? What does a young man miss in his masculinity when he can't learn from modeling?
That's
Well,
it.
everything about a man he learns, because that's why they model thugs.
Yes.
That's why they model womanizers. And the black culture is a whole different conversation, Doc.
Yes.
However, that's the reason why that. So, what can you say to kind of wrap up this segment about what the kid is missing about masculinity just from modeling behavior?
I love that. I love what you said. And you're talking about raising the standards. I love how you put it that we've grown accustomed to this kind of abnormality. And it is abnormal in our culture to have this kind of view towards men. We know historically the value that men had in our community. We saw it, we wanted it, we embraced it. And we know there were some things that gave rise to how it kind of came about. We understand some of that history behind it. But men were valued, recognized. We saw all of that coming up and we've read about it. But we've grown accustomed to, I mean, you have kids say, oh, is your father in a home? And that's a surprise. But I will say this, Mr. Harrison, some of the data we got to disaggregate, because when you disaggregate some of that data, you see some things going on in certain communities that you may not see in others.
Yeah.
And I know oftentimes we speak from a macro standpoint, but when you break up some of that data, you see some things that are going on in certain communities. Single family homes can be 80, 75, 80%. In other areas, it may be 25 to 30%. So when you break up some of the data and you see the results of that in certain communities, we see crime more likely to take place in certain areas. We see certain things,
Come
and a
on.
lot has to do a lot with the family structure. So I would say we break some of that data down and we see things different. In fact, we see different. We see higher life expectancies in certain communities than others, notwithstanding the color of the skin notwithstanding the color of our skin. It's just based on sometimes certain communities and what that comes, income and education, all of those things. But I will say uh, there are some deficits, and how do we get? How do we improve those deficits? But it requires us to look at that next generation. We talk about the alpha generation, those that are 12 and under. We talk about the Z generation, those who are under 30.
Mm-hmm.
How do we influence them? How do we influence that generation to do better? But if they're not in the home, how do we influence those young brothers who perhaps may not have a father or a significant male in their home? That's our challenge. But having this kind of conversation will allow men, or hopefully persuade men, to do better. Recognizing some of the things that they're struggling with. Just because one perhaps didn't have a father doesn't mean they can't be a good father to a young man. Keep that piece in mind. But having these conversations brings thought. It makes us purposeful. But we can't do better unless we know better. And educating is the first sign of knowing better. Okay. I'll kind of leave it at that. There's some more things I can say, but I'll kind of leave it at that.
So what we're going to do before we end this segment, I'm going to tell you what I think masculinity is and why it's needed. And then, Doc, I'm going to need you to wrap it up one more time about what you think masculinity is. Mm-hmm. Okay?
Yes.
So when I talk about what masculinity is, I think a man brings a masculine energy to his surroundings those surroundings need. Number one, they need a visionary. Not that women can't be visionaries, but you know what? Men are seed givers. We give seed to women. It's just biologically correct. No matter what anybody says, men are seed givers. Women are seed receivers. Okay? Men cast vision. Men are supposed to protect. Not that women don't protect, but men protect in a different way. Did you know that over 99% of all the deaths that's taken place in war since the beginning of time have been men? Did you know that men work the most dangerous jobs? They build skyscrapers. They build bridges. I'm not saying that women don't do that, but it's mostly men because there are things that men bring to the table, not that women can't, but a man is supposed to bring it to the table. I don't want to ask a woman to bring something to the table that I could. Men are traditionally known as providers. I know men these days don't even like to hear that, but we should be providing. That's just my opinion about it. You know what? And you know what we should also be able to do? We should set boundaries. We should protect. We should inspire. We have the ability to tell a child what they're going to become, who they are. We can establish identity because we walk in masculine energy. And the last thing is going to surprise y'all. I think we should be nurturers. I don't think you can cast vision. I don't think you can protect. I don't think you can provide. I don't think that you can do any of that unless you nurture. Because if you don't know how to nurture, you're not going to be able to tell your kids what they are. You're not going to be able to speak life and speak vision and protect. So this is the reason why I think masculine energy is needed. A man is needed because he brings a lot more stuff to the table than previously anticipated. So, Doc, I want you to go ahead and tell the people. Tell me. Close this segment out. What do you think this masculine? Harris, I tell you, what being masculine is?
Oh gosh, it's so complicated. Again, it is defined as a possession of attributes or features associated with men. But one can argue that when we talk about masculinity, it may emphasize gender, unlike males, which stresses or emphasizes biological sex. And so, as we talk about this, you see me being a little pensive, and you see me at times expressing some uncomfortable kind of gestures because it is a very difficult conversation. And we want this conversation to be inclusive. And so as we are in this space where in society where gender neutrality is being focused at times, it becomes a difficult conversation and can be offensive. But I think as people listen to this, I want them to understand the idea is to make communities better. And the idea is to improve the future of the next generation, is to recognize that men and women bring things to the table. And is to get the best out of both. It is to look back to some of those traditional values. And I'm going to be mindful of traditional but I want to get back to some of those traditional values. But at the same time, we want to embrace our contemporary values. We don't want to exclude women, as you talked about, and how women weren't able to vote till 1920. All those antiquated kind of ideas, absolutely not. But we want to understand that there's so much that men have to offer, and in certain communities, they're not there. And we need to get them back there. They need to be supportive, they need to be nurturing, but they need to be present. And being masculine is part of that conversation. And being responsible and all of those things. So, Ms. Harris, I hope I answered that correctly. It's a good conversation, and it can be it's a complex one in the space that we are in now. It's a little complex, but I hope I answered that pretty well.
And you know what? And to me, it's not necessarily a right or wrong answer, but I will say this: we will create space
Yes.
for women to speak their piece on the matter. But
Yes.
I really just only want to deal with the men. And sometimes truth, we always say it's hard to swallow, yet when it's served, we never try to swallow it. And
Yeah.
with that being said, that's going to end this segment. What is masculinity? The next segment, we're going to chop it up about why is masculinity under attack? And perhaps this segment will be way more controversial than the last one. Because I am the type of person, I am going to say what needs to be said. Okay?
Okay.
Because I'm blessed the mic because I got something to say. And I rock headphones because I'm listening twice as much as I talk. It's the idea shift and Dr. McNair. We going to chop it up in this next segment.
Very good.